My sister secretly took out a $20,000 loan in my name and said, "I didn't think you'd notice." So I reported her for identity theft. Now she's dealing with a criminal record and our parents are furious. Story 1. This is going to sound insane, but this actually happened, and my life has been flipped upside down ever since. I need to get this out because I feel like I'm losing my mind over how things turned out. I grew up in a small town in Indiana. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and people live for gossip. My family's always been a little chaotic, but we stuck together through most things. Or at least, that's what I thought. Turns out, blood doesn't always mean loyalty. I'm 29, work in IT, and have been saving for a house for years. I don't live extravagantly. I don't even have a fancy car, just a reliable little Honda that gets me where I need to go. I've been super careful with money my whole life. I pay my bills on time, don't carry debt, and check my credit score regularly. That's why what happened hit me like a truck. My older sister, Desiree, is 32. She's the kind of person who always seems to be in the middle of a mess. She was the golden child growing up, funny, charming, and always getting away with everything. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one. If Desiree forgot to clean her room, I got yelled at for not reminding her. If she spent all her allowance on something dumb, my parents borrowed money from mine to make up for it. You get the picture. Desiree got married young to a guy named Darren who made good money. They moved to Chicago, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. Then the marriage fell apart. She moved back to our parents' house and has been living there for 3 years now. She works odd jobs but doesn't seem to care about getting her life together. She still acts like she's living the high life, though, shopping sprees, eating out all the time, the works. I knew she wasn't doing great financially, but I had no idea how bad it really was. 6 months ago, I was getting ready to apply for a mortgage. I'd been saving for years and was finally in a place where I could start looking for a house. I was so excited, until the bank ran my credit report. Apparently, I had a $20,000 personal loan in my name that was in default. My credit score was tanked, and I was blindsided. I've never taken out a loan like that. I don't even have a credit card balance. I was sure it had to be a mistake. I called the bank immediately. They told me the loan had been taken out 6 months earlier with an online lender. Everything was in my name, my social security number, my birthday, everything. But then they told me the email address linked to the account. It was almost my email but had an extra letter in it. That's when I started to feel sick. Someone had faked my email. Then they told me the address tied to the account. It was my parents' house. I didn't want to believe it, but everything was pointing in one direction. The only person who had access to my personal info, who lived at my parents' house, and who was desperate for money. It had to be Desiree. I spent the rest of the day in a daze. I felt betrayed, angry, and honestly a little scared. If she was willing to do something like this, what else was she capable of? That evening, I drove over to my parents' house. My mom was cooking dinner, and my dad was glued to the TV. Desiree was sprawled out on the couch scrolling on her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. I walked in and went straight to her. "Did you take out a loan in my name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up at me with this blank expression, like I just asked her if it was raining outside. Then she laughed nervously and said, "Oh, that? I didn't think you'd notice." I didn't think I'd notice? My heart was pounding in my chest. She went on, trying to downplay it like it was no big deal. "I needed the money for some bills, and I was going to pay it back. You're doing fine, Rick. I didn't think it'd be a big deal." I couldn't even respond at first. I was so angry I thought I might actually explode. She had stolen $20,000 from me, trashed my credit, and then acted like I was overreacting for being mad about it. She even had the nerve to try and guilt-trip me, saying, "You've always had it together. I just needed a little help." I turned to my parents, expecting them to back me up. My mom looked uncomfortable and muttered something about how Desiree had been struggling lately. My dad shrugged and said, "She probably didn't mean any harm." "Are you kidding me? She stole my identity and tanked my credit, and they were acting like she'd just borrowed my favorite sweater without asking." I couldn't believe it. I left without saying another word. I needed time to think, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't letting this slide. The next day, I went to the police and filed a report for identity theft. I handed over all the evidence, the fake email, the loan documents, and proof that the address was my parents' house. The officer I spoke to was professional but warned me that pursuing charges against a family member could get ugly. I told him I didn't care. She'd crossed a line, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. When Desiree got served with papers, she lost it. She called me nonstop, leaving angry voicemails about how I was ruining her life. When I didn't respond, she started texting, begging me to drop the charges. Then my parents got involved. My mom called me crying, saying I was tearing the family apart. She said Desiree had made a mistake but that she didn't deserve to have her life ruined over it. My dad said I was being too harsh and that family should stick together. I told them, she stole from me. She committed fraud. What did you expect me to do, just roll over and let it go? They didn't have an answer for that, but they still made me feel like the villain. Desiree ended up being charged with identity theft and fraud. She got a criminal record and was ordered to pay restitution. My parents were furious with me for not backing down. Desiree stopped talking to me altogether, which honestly was fine by me. I was done with her. Things got even messier after Desiree was charged. She kept trying to play the victim, telling anyone who would listen that I was overreacting and ruining her life for no reason. Her story conveniently left out the part where she stole $20,000 from me. Even some extended family started reaching out to me, saying things like, "Can't you just forgive her? She's your sister." But I stood firm. I'd done nothing wrong, and I wasn't going to let her guilt me into letting her off the hook. She wasn't a victim, she was a thief. My parents took Desiree's side completely. They told me I was being cruel and ungrateful, which honestly stung. I'd always been the responsible one, the one they leaned on. But now that Desiree had gotten herself into trouble, they were bending over backward to protect her. It felt like they were punishing me for standing up for myself. They started cutting me out of family events. Birthdays, holidays, suddenly, I wasn't invited. When I asked my mom why, she said, "It's just too awkward with everything going on. Maybe you should let things cool down." Cool down? I wasn't the one who stole from someone. I was furious but decided to focus on myself. If they wanted to enable Desiree, that was on them. Now, I could have let things end with the criminal charges, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Desiree hadn't just stolen money from me, she'd stolen my trust, my time, and my peace of mind. She needed to learn a lesson she'd never forget. I started looking into her finances. It wasn't hard since I still had access to the email she'd used to take out the loan. I found out she'd been using my stolen identity for other things too, subscription services, small online purchases, even a gym membership she never used. I gathered all the evidence and handed it over to the police. But that wasn't all. I also decided to hit her where it would hurt the most, her reputation. Desiree had been running a side hustle selling handmade crafts online, and she prided herself on her small business image. She always bragged about how much work she put into it and how she was finally doing something meaningful. Well, her business website and social media accounts were all registered under the fake email she'd made with my name. Since that email technically belonged to me, I had every right to shut it all down, and I did. I contacted the platforms she was using, showed them proof of identity theft, and explained that the email account was tied to a criminal investigation. Her accounts were deactivated within days. No more Etsy shop, no more Instagram for her business, no more income from selling overpriced trinkets. When she found out, she flipped out and started sending me more angry texts. I ignored her. If she wanted to play dirty, she should have been prepared for the consequences. Desiree tried to spin the situation as me being vindictive, but people started to see through her lies. Once word got out about the criminal charges and her business being shut down, her friends and even some family members stopped associating with her. Nobody wants to hang out with someone who steals from their own brother. My parents, though? They still stuck by her. They even offered to cover part of her restitution payments to help her get back on her feet. That was the last straw for me. I told them, if you want to keep enabling her, go ahead. But don't expect me to stick around for it. I cut contact with them after that. It was hard, but it was the only way to protect my sanity. With Desiree out of my life and the police handling the rest, I started focusing on myself again. It took months to get my credit back to where it was, but I finally did it. I even found a great little house that I was able to put a down payment on. Moving in felt like a fresh start, like I was finally free from all the chaos my family had brought into my life. One day, I got a letter from the court. Desiree had been ordered to pay me back the full $20,000 over the next 5 years as part of her probation. If she missed even one payment, she'd face jail time. Knowing that she'd have to feel the consequences of her actions every month for years was the icing on the cake. Here's the kicker. A few months after I moved into my new house, I got a call from an old family friend. They told me that Desiree had tried to pull a similar stunt on someone else, this time using their name to open a credit card. But unlike me, they didn't confront her quietly. They went straight to the police, and now she's facing even more charges. When I heard that, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't just me she'd targeted. She really was a serial liar and thief. I had done the right thing by standing up to her, even when it felt like the whole world was against me. Desiree is now stuck living with my parents, broke and with no friends left. Her small business is gone, her reputation is ruined, and she has to send me monthly payments as a reminder of what she did. Meanwhile, I'm thriving in my new home, surrounded by people who actually respect me. Do I feel bad about how things turned out? Not at all. She made her choices, and now she has to live with them. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that family isn't about blood, it's about trust. And if someone, even family, breaks that trust, they don't deserve a place in your life. And that's how I got revenge on my sister for stealing $20,000 from me. She thought I'd roll over and let her get away with it, but instead, she ended up with a criminal record, a ruined life, and no one left to blame but herself. Story 2. My name's Gideon, I'm 33, and I live in Ashwick, a small, old town in New England. Picture cobblestone streets, houses with peeling white paint, and a population where everybody knows everybody. Ashwick's been home for my entire life. It's quiet, predictable, and the kind of place where a secret spreads faster than wildfire. Trust me, I'm living proof. Let me introduce the main players in this absolute mess. First, there's Sabine, my, now ex-girlfriend. She's 30, moved here a few years ago to work at the local physical therapy clinic, and had that small-town charm that made her impossible not to fall for. When we first met at a fundraiser for the animal shelter, I thought, this is it. She's the one. We dated for 3 years, and had started saving for a ring. I thought we were happy. Or at least, I was. Then, there's my younger brother, Finlo. Yeah, his name's unusual, but you don't forget a name like Finlo, which fits because you don't forget a guy like him either. Finlo is 3 years younger than me, and he's always been the golden child. He's tall, good-looking, and has this effortless charm that makes everyone around him feel like they're the only person in the room. Growing up, he was Mom's favorite. When he stole my bike and wrecked it, she grounded me for not sharing. He's the kind of guy who never faced real consequences. Until now. This story starts on a random Wednesday, the kind of day where you think nothing significant will happen. I had been in Boston for a work conference and finished early. I thought I'd surprise Sabine by coming home a day ahead of schedule. She didn't know I was coming. I even stopped by her favorite bakery and grabbed almond croissants, her absolute weakness. I was all smiles, picturing the look on her face when I walked through the door. Her house is this cute little blue cottage with flower boxes under the windows. I let myself in with the spare keys she gave me months ago, balancing the croissants in one hand and my overnight bag in the other. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Usually, she'd have music playing or the TV on for background noise, but that day, there was nothing. Just this strange silence. Sabine? I called out, setting the croissants on the kitchen counter. No answer. I walked down the hallway toward her bedroom. That's when I heard voices, low, muffled, but unmistakably hers and a man's. My first thought was that maybe her cousin Dmitri was visiting. He'd crashed at her place before when he was in town. But something felt off. The tone of their voices wasn't casual. It wasn't the way you talk to family. My stomach twisted, and my heart started pounding. I pushed open the door, and there they were. Sabine was sitting on the edge of her bed, wearing one of those oversized t-shirts she loved to sleep in. Standing in front of her, shirtless, was my brother. My own brother. He had one hand braced on the wall like he was leaning casually, but his face turned to stone the moment he saw me. Sabine's eyes went wide, and her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Gideon, she said, her voice a high-pitched squeak. It's not what it looks like. I stared at them, my brain struggling to catch up with what I was seeing. Finlo looked just as panicked. He raised his hands in the air like he'd just been caught robbing a bank. Gid, let me explain. Explain what? I said, my voice shaking. Why my brother is half naked in my girlfriend's bedroom. Sure, I'd love to hear this one. Sabine stood up, her hands fluttering like she was trying to physically grab the words out of thin air. There's nothing going on. The sink was leaking, Finlo came over to help, and what? He fixed it with his shirt off? I snapped. Finlo, always the smooth talker, jumped in. Look, it's not like that. I got water all over my shirt, and I didn't have a spare. The sheer ridiculousness of their excuses hit me like a slap. So, let me get this straight. You couldn't go home to change? You couldn't call me to fix the sink? You thought standing half naked in my girlfriend's room was the best solution? Neither of them answered. They just stood there, caught in the spotlight of their own stupidity. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to hear another word. I turned around and walked out, ignoring their voices calling after me. I drove home in a blur, my mind racing with questions I didn't want answers to. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the image of them together. It didn't make sense. Sabine and I were happy, weren't we? And Finlo, he was my brother. He annoyed the hell out of me, but I never thought he'd do something like this. I wanted to believe their stupid story, but the more I thought about it, the less it added up. That's when I decided to dig. I started with Sabine's phone. We were on the same phone plan, so I logged into the online account and checked her call history. There were a few calls to a number I didn't recognize. Nothing too suspicious, but it stuck in my head. Then I checked her texts. Most of them were normal, chats with her friends, her mom, but nothing under Finlo's number. Then I remembered Finlo's habit of using burner apps for texting. He'd done it in college to hide messages from his exes. I installed spyware on Sabine's laptop. I know it's wrong, but at that point, I didn't care. And that's when I found them. Dozens of messages between her and an unknown number. The tone was unmistakable. They weren't talking about leaky sinks. They were meeting up. Regularly. For months. When I confronted Sabine, she cried. She tried to deny it at first, but the evidence was right there. Finally, she admitted it. She and Finlow had been sleeping together behind my back. 6 months, she said. 6 goddamn months. She tried to apologize, but I didn't want to hear it. I left her house and went straight to Finlow's apartment. When I showed him the messages, he didn't even try to deny it. He just stood there, looking guilty as hell. Why? I demanded. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. Why would you do this to me? I didn't mean for it to happen, he said, which made me want to punch him right there. It just did. That's your excuse? It just did? I stormed out before I did something I'd regret. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. After confronting both of them, I went quiet. They thought I'd backed off, maybe even forgiven them. Sabine texted me a few times, saying she wanted to talk things through. Finlow didn't even try. He avoided me completely, which was fine because I wasn't ready to see him. Not yet. Instead, I started planning. Revenge, when done right, takes patience. I didn't want some quick, impulsive blow-up. I wanted this to hurt. I wanted them to feel the way they'd made me feel, betrayed, humiliated, and alone. First, I dug deeper. Sabine was still working at the local clinic, and Finlow had just started dating a new girl, Maeve, who worked at the town library. Sweet, quiet Maeve. She deserved to know the truth. So, I started with her. Step 1, telling Maeve. I waited until I saw Maeve at the library, sorting books behind the counter. She smiled when she saw me, like she didn't have a clue what kind of guy she was dating. My stomach churned a little, but I reminded myself that she needed to know. Maeve, I said, leaning on the counter. Can I talk to you for a second? It's about Finlow. Her smile faltered. Oh. Okay. What's wrong? I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshots of the texts between Sabine and Finlow, and handed it to her. This is what's wrong. She read the messages, her face going pale. Her hands started shaking, and when she finally looked up at me, her eyes were glossy with tears. Are you serious? He cheated with your girlfriend? 6 months, I said flatly. I thought you should know. Maeve didn't cry right there, but I could tell she was holding it in. Thank you for telling me, she said softly. I'll handle it. And she did. That night, Maeve dumped him. From what I heard, she did it in public at his favorite bar, loud enough for everyone to hear. Finlow tried to smooth talk his way out of it, but Maeve wasn't having it. She stormed out, leaving him standing there like the fool he was. Step 2, Sabine's reputation. Next, I turned my attention to Sabine. She had a spotless reputation in Ashwick. People thought she was sweet, kind, and professional. They didn't know the truth, and I wanted to make sure they did. So, I wrote a carefully worded post on the town's Facebook group. Nothing dramatic or over the top, just the facts. Hi everyone, I wanted to share something personal because I think it's important to know who you're trusting. My girlfriend of 3 years, Sabine, was having an affair with my brother for 6 months. I found out recently and confronted them both. I'm heartbroken, but I believe the truth deserves to be known. I attached the screenshots of their texts, just enough to prove my point without being graphic. Then I hit post and waited. Ashwick is a small town. The post blew up within hours. People couldn't stop talking about it. Sabine's coworkers saw it. Her patients saw it. By the next day, she was calling me nonstop, begging me to take it down. She said it was ruining her career and that she'd made a mistake. I didn't respond. She deserved every bit of it. Step 3, Finlow's career. Finlow worked as a freelance graphic designer, which meant his reputation was everything. Most of his clients came from personal referrals, so I knew exactly how to hit him where it hurt. I sent an email to every client I could find listed on his website, explaining what he'd done to me. I didn't go into messy details, just enough to show his lack of integrity and trustworthiness. A few weeks later, I heard from a mutual friend that Finlow had lost several big clients. Apparently, no one wanted to work with a guy who could backstab his own brother. Step 4, the grand finale. The final nail in the coffin came when I discovered Sabine and Finlow had been meeting up at a cabin owned by one of Finlow's friends. It was a little place tucked away in the woods, and they thought it was their secret hideout. They didn't know I'd found out. I waited until I knew they'd be there, Saturday afternoon, right before a storm was supposed to roll in. I drove out to the cabin, parked far enough away so they wouldn't hear me, and snuck up to the porch. I had printed out all their messages, the entire 6 months' worth, and scattered them across the porch. Then I left a note on the door that simply said, "Enjoy the storm. You've earned it." By the time they found my little gift, the rain had started. Their precious hideout was soaked in proof of their betrayal. Sabine left Ashwick within a month. Word got around fast, and she couldn't handle the judgment. Last I heard, she moved to Vermont to start over. Finlow stuck around, but his reputation was in shambles. He lost most of his friends, and Mom refused to let him come to family gatherings for a while. Dad barely speaks to him. As for me? I'm finally at peace. Therapy helped me work through the anger, but I won't lie, knowing they got what they deserved makes it easier to sleep at night. I'm not interested in dating again anytime soon, but when I do, I know I'll find someone who actually respects me. And Finlow? He'll never get that respect back. Not from me, and not from anyone else in Ashwick. Actions have consequences, and sometimes, those consequences are exactly what you deserve.